You don't fear me, human? The High Regent's astonished question. The Cascade Range trembled as a sovereignty dreadnought plummeted through the early morning sky, its thunderous descent splitting the silence that clung to the pine-studded slopes. Burning fragments scattered in all directions, trailing fire and oily smoke, some crashing through the treetops and others embedding themselves in the earth with bone-jarring impact. Lieutenant Mason Hale pressed himself tight against a moss-blanketed boulder, heart hammering as the ground quaked beneath him, the vibration thrumming up his spine and rattling his teeth. He watched, breath shallow, as the immense warship gouged a fiery wound across the valley below, its hull shrieking in protest, dragging up a torrent of splintered trees and black soil before it finally shuddered to a smoking, ruinous halt. A pall of gray smoke hung in the chill air, carrying with it the acrid bite of scorched polymer and an oddly sweet, foreign aroma. Mason's fingers closed around the grip of his sidearm, a compact recon pistol, hardly reassuring against what might emerge from that wreck. His gear was lightweight, designed for speed and stealth, not the sort of armor that would do much against sovereignty boarding parties. He expected a scout pod at most, maybe a pair of stunned survivors, desperate and dangerous. But as he approached, slipping from shadow to shadow, his eyes caught sight of the sigil seared into the broken hull, a triple helix inscribed in mirrored silver. He froze. Only one sovereignty ship bore that crest. Only one being commanded such a vessel. The Vale High Regent herself. His throat went dry. For a moment, fear warred with training. The orders were clear: eliminate sovereignty command at any cost. But the dreadnought was dying, metal shrieking in the cooling air, its corridors strobing with failing emergency lights. Mason drew a steadying breath, then slipped through a ragged gash in the hull. Inside, chaos reigned. Emergency strobes flickered through swirling clouds of vapor, casting everything in lurid crimson and sickly white. The walls, once seamless and gleaming, were buckled and torn, exposing lattices of alien technology, their edges weeping viscous blue coolant. Every footstep squelched against shattered plating and melted insulation. His boots left prints in a slick of something that smelled faintly of burnt honey. Mason moved swiftly, 30 paces into the labyrinthine wreck, the only sound his own breath and the distant groan of cooling metal. Then he saw her. Lirayan Sira Vey, the Vale High Regent. 7 feet tall, even slumped against the ruined corridor wall, her midnight blue skin shimmering in the erratic light. Silver-white hair tumbled over scale-like patterns that traced her temples and the column of her neck, catching the light in a way that seemed both ethereal and formidable. Indigo blood welled from a jagged wound in her side, pooling beneath her, and a massive support beam pinned her lower body, crushing her against the battered deck. Yet even broken, even bleeding, she radiated power, a presence that seemed to command gravity itself. Mason's pistol snapped up reflexively, but he hesitated. She was helpless, trapped. He should end her life, avenge the cities she'd consigned to flames, the friends he'd buried beneath sovereignty bombardments. But as he met her gaze, something shifted. Her eyes, glowing violet, burned with wary lucidity, fierce, but undeniably alive. His medic's instincts surged to the fore, memories of battlefield triage and broken bodies overriding the doctrine drilled into him since the war began. He lowered his weapon, cautiously approaching, hands raised to show he meant no immediate harm. She watched him, every muscle tense despite her injuries. Her breathing was ragged, pain etched into the line of her jaw. Yet her voice, when it came, was steady. Human? The word fell from her lips, heavy with curiosity and a hint of disbelief. Yeah. Mason crouched beside her, scanning the beam. You're losing too much blood. She studied him, lips curling into a faint, ironic smile. Pain is familiar, she murmured, the words tinged with dry humor. This'll hurt, he warned, bracing his shoulder against the cold, warped metal. She nodded once, regal even in defeat. Do what you must. With a grunt, Mason pushed. The beam shifted, screeching against the floor. Lorraine gasped, the sound sharp and raw, but she did not cry out. Her hands clenched, nails biting into her palms. At last, the beam rolled aside, and Mason slid to her side, tearing a field dressing from his pack. He worked quickly, assessing the wound, binding it with practiced efficiency. The blood was deep indigo, slick and hot against his gloves, but the patterns of trauma were familiar. Torn flesh, fractured bone, shock. As he splinted her leg and checked for other injuries, he became aware of her eyes on him, piercing, searching. Why help me? She demanded, voice low but insistent. You know who I am? Mason nodded, his hands never pausing. I know, but right now, you're just someone who needs saving. For the first time, Lorraine was silent, her words stolen by confusion and something deeper, a flicker of uncertainty beneath the sovereign mask. Mason finished stabilizing her, then gently lifted her into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, but he managed, careful not to jostle her wounds as he carried her from the mangled wreckage. As darkness closed in around her, Lorraine's thoughts spun. Why had he chosen mercy? She tried to form the question aloud, but her vision blurred and her strength gave out. Mason's arms tightened, steady and warm, as he carried her into the uncertain dawn, leaving behind the ruin and 1,000 questions neither of them could yet answer. Lorraine awakened to unfamiliar comfort. The sensation was so alien that, for a moment, she remained utterly still, waiting for pain or shackles or interrogation. Instead, she lay beneath a simple homespun quilt, the fibers rough but warm against her skin. Sunlight filtered through a small window, dappling the faded wood of the ceiling. The air was scented with pine sap, antiseptic, and, curiously, brewing tea. Her wounds had been cleaned and dressed with a competence that spoke of battlefield experience. She flexed her fingers, no restraints. The pain in her side was a dull throb, manageable, not the white-hot agony she remembered. A quiet rustle drew her gaze. Mason sat nearby in a battered armchair, one ankle hooked over his knee, an e-reader balanced in his hand. He seemed utterly at ease in the worn flannel shirt and faded jeans, yet his eyes flicked to her the moment she stirred. You're awake, he said, setting the device aside. His voice was gentle, almost tentative. He rose and crossed to the bed, helping her sit up and propping pillows behind her with a care that belied his size. She regarded him warily, her pride refusing to let her appear weak. Where am I? Her voice was hoarse but steady. My cabin, Mason replied. Not far from where your ship went down. It's safe. He offered her a mug of tea, steam curling upward. No cell, no guards, no interrogation. He gave a wry smile. Just my home. Lorraine accepted the mug, cradling it in her hands. Her senses probed for threats, hidden cameras, surveillance drones, the subtle hum of security fields. There were none, only the ticking of a clock and the muted crackle of a wood stove. The absence of hostility unsettled her more than any prison. I fail to see your motive, she said at last, meeting his gaze. What do you gain by sparing me? Mason leaned against the foot of the bed, arms loosely folded. Not everything's about gain. He shrugged, the gesture tired. Maybe I'm just tired of death. She searched his face for guile but found none. Compassion, in her world, was always a weapon, wielded to manipulate, to extract loyalty, to break resolve. She had never witnessed it offered as a choice. He seemed to sense her disbelief. You want answers, he said, his tone calm. So let's not pretend. I know who you are, what you've done. I've seen the aftermath. Entire systems razed, Planets reduced to cinders, billions gone, just like that. There was no accusation in his voice, just a weariness that settled between them like dust. But here you are, wounded and helpless, and I'm me. For the first time in centuries, she felt the weight of her own actions, not as an abstraction, but as a living, choking presence. She gripped the mug tighter, struggling to reconcile his kindness with everything she had come to expect from the enemy. "You rescued me," she said quietly. "Why?" Mason's gaze drifted to the window, where a squirrel darted along the sill. "Someone has to stop the cycle," he said. "Violence breeds more violence. You kill one of mine, I kill one of yours. Eventually, we forget why we started, but we never forget how to hurt each other." He exhaled slowly. "Maybe if one person chooses mercy, it matters." She studied him, noting the steady hands, the fine white scars that mapped his knuckles and forearms. Here was a soldier who had chosen peace, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. The days that followed settled into a strange, tentative rhythm. Mason tended to her with a quiet professionalism, changing her bandages with gentle hands, bringing her simple meals, vegetable stew, toast, the occasional tart apple. He never pried about the sovereignty, never pressed for secrets or bargains. He asked nothing of her, save that she rest and heal. In the evenings, while twilight spilled through the window, Liren would watch him from the bed as he read from his battered e-reader. She found herself intrigued by the way he furrowed his brow, by the soft sighs of frustration or amusement that escaped him. One night, curiosity overcame her. "What do you read?" she asked. Mason glanced up, surprised. "Strategy, history. Sometimes poetry, when I'm feeling reckless." She smirked, recognizing a phrase from his screen. "To know your enemy is to know yourself." The old adage from Sun Tzu. He returned her smile. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone really does." A silence settled, companionable rather than strained. She ventured another question, her voice low. "Why was Earth never invaded? Surely your world was vulnerable." Lorraine hesitated, then admitted. "No strategic value, easier conquests elsewhere. Your sun is unstable, your resources limited. The cost outweighed the gain." He nodded, accepting the answer with a calm that surprised her. No anger, no bitterness, just understanding. One morning Mason entered with a tray, porridge, honey, and a fresh cup of tea. He helped her sit up, checking her bandages with gentle, practiced movements. "You heal faster than I expected," he remarked. "My kind regenerates quickly," she replied. "The sovereignty engineered us for resilience. It's useful." He smiled wryly. "Bet it doesn't help with emotional wounds." She looked away, uncertain how to answer. In her world, pain was weakness, vulnerability a flaw. Here, in this modest cabin, both seemed to have a place. One night, as the wind moaned softly through the trees and shadows danced on the ceiling, Lirayan broke the silence. "Tell me about your past," she said. "What made you choose mercy?" Mason hesitated, his gaze unfocused. "I've seen what happens when you forget your enemy is human, or something close to it." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I was 19 when the war started. Lost friends, family. I hated you. I wanted vengeance. But after a while, all I saw was more bodies, more ruin. No one is born a monster." His voice was soft, almost lost in the hush of the room. The simplicity of his answer unsettled her more than any accusation. She had been forged in violence, taught that mercy was the luxury of the weak. But here, mercy was a choice, a difficult, defiant stand against a universe addicted to bloodshed. She stared at him, studying the lines etched into his face, the haunted look in his eyes. He had suffered, but he had not allowed suffering to define him. "Your leaders," she said softly. "They will want me for questioning, for justice. You know this. Mason's reply was quiet but unwavering. They'll have to go through me first. The conviction in his voice caught her off guard, stirring something deep within her. A flutter of hope, or perhaps fear, that she could not name. In all her years, she had never felt protected, never allowed herself to trust the kindness of an enemy. Dusk settled outside, painting the walls with fading gold and violet. Lyraean lay back against the pillows, listening to the sounds of Mason moving about the small kitchen, the scent of tea mingling with the cool mountain air. For the first time since her childhood, she realized she felt safe. She closed her eyes, letting herself drift, knowing that whatever came next, she would face it with him at her side. By the fifth morning, Lyraean was strong enough to walk. The ache in her side had dulled, the wounds knitted by a sovereignty resilience she'd always taken for granted. She rose from the makeshift bed in Mason's small guest room, fingers brushing over the rough cotton of the borrowed shirt and soft, patched pants he'd left for her. The fabric was plain, unmistakably human, clinging awkwardly to her tall, angular frame. She slipped her feet into woolen socks and padded out, drawn by the faint clatter of dishes and the low drone of a kettle. Mason sat at the kitchen table, hunched over a scatter of photographs. The morning sun poured in, silvering the edges of his hair and casting his features in gentle relief. His hands, steady as ever, trembled as he moved the pictures, arranging and rearranging them into a silent narrative. Lyraean approached, her gaze falling to the images spread before him. She saw radiant cities, domes of crystal and light, spires that reached for distant moons. Aris Prime, its beauty immortalized in old photographs, the blue-white glow of its capital unmistakable. But then came the next row, ruins and wastelands, charred skeletons of towers, landscapes cratered and ash-choked, human figures, tiny, defiant, picked their way through devastation, her own handiwork. Mason did not look up as she reached his side. His voice, when it came, was quiet but suffused with purpose. Lieutenant Mason Hale, Aurora Defense Corps. His thumb pressed against the insignia sewn to his faded sleeve. Last survivor of the Lysian outpost. Her memory sharpened with painful clarity, the siege, the desperate flight of the final shuttle. She remembered the handful of life signatures she'd allowed to escape, calculating that their survival would matter little to the outcome. She had been wrong. Mason was among them. He exhaled, finally meeting her eyes. "I tracked you for years," he said, the confession raw. "After Aris Prime fell, I had nothing left. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of finding you, finishing what you started." Lyran's hands trembled as she reached for a photograph, tracing the outline of a ruined city with her thumb. "And when you found me, you saved me." The words tasted bitter, heavy with guilt and disbelief. "Yes," Mason replied. The single syllable lingered in the air, thick with meaning neither of them could unravel. She stared at him, stunned. "Why?" He looked away, blinking rapidly. His eyes shone with unshed tears, catching the sunlight. "I don't know." A silence fell between them, intimate and unguarded. Lyraean felt the old armor around her heart begin to crack, splintering under the weight of his vulnerability. "I remember every world," she whispered, voice thin. "Every order I gave. I destroyed Aris Prime. I led the bombardment of Lycia. I let your people die." She forced herself to meet his gaze, bracing for anger or condemnation. Mason nodded, his expression carved from something deeper than rage. "I know. I lost everyone. My sister, my crew." His hands shook as he gathered the photographs. "But carrying that hate, it was eating me alive." She swallowed, the confession burning her throat. "Why didn't you let me die?" The question escaped her, ragged. He pushed back from the table and knelt beside her, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Killing you wouldn't heal anything. I'm tired of emptiness. When I look at you now, I see someone as lost as I am. Her composure broke. She leaned into his touch, feeling the warmth of his hand against her cheek, the gentleness that no sovereignty rival had ever shown her. I don't know how to be anything else, she whispered, the admission pulling tears from her eyes. Neither did I, Mason replied. Maybe we can learn together. He brushed away her tears, his thumb gentle. I care for you, Liren. The words were not a plea, but a promise, steady and terrifying in their honesty. She froze, staring at him through a blur of tears. You can't care for me, she breathed. You don't know what I've done. He held her gaze, unwavering. Then show me. Liren's hands shook as she reached out, fingertips brushing his temples. Their minds brushed, a tentative merging, and she opened herself, memories flooding outward, star maps charting campaigns, casualty lists scrolling by, the cold calculus of devastation. He saw the cities reduced to embers, the faces of the dead. He felt the crushing weight of command, the loneliness at the pinnacle of power. Through her, he glimpsed the moment she first ordered a bombardment, her face a mask of sovereign resolve as a million lives winked out in silence. Mason's jaw clenched, knuckles whitening on the table's edge, but he did not pull away. He watched, endured, accepted. After a long, trembling moment, he spoke, voice steady but thick. Tell me about your first campaign. She closed her eyes, letting the memory surface. Vela, she said softly. I was young, barely more than a cadet, but I was given command. It was my first taste of conquest. I remember the fear in their eyes. I remember telling myself it was necessary, that I was shaping the future. But it never got easier. Mason nodded. What was your name before all this? She hesitated, a lifetime of secrets warring with the need for honesty. Liraine, she whispered. That's always been my name. I gave up everything else. He took her hand, his warmth grounding her, anchoring her to the present. What did you want before the war? She searched her memory, finding a fragment of herself buried beneath centuries of violence. To explore, to learn. I wanted to see the worlds beyond sovereignty space, to understand them, before I became this. He squeezed her hand, thumb tracing gentle circles over her knuckles. Maybe it's not too late. Her heart lurched at his words. She searched his face for doubt and found only hope, stubborn and fragile. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gentle affirmation that made her breath catch. Before she could speak, a harsh burst of static cut through the quiet. The cabin's battered comm unit crackled to life, spilling out clipped, urgent words. Unidentified sovereignty fleet, approaching low orbit. Repeat, sovereignty fleet, coordinates locked. Lorraine's skin paled, her eyes going wide. The blood that had just begun to run warm through her veins felt like ice. Mason was already on his feet, hands moving with soldier's efficiency, grabbing a pack, checking weapons, scanning the window for movement. They've found me, Lorraine said, her voice shaking. Mason's jaw was set, his eyes already hard with resolve. Then we make our stand, together. For a heartbeat, the world held still, the promise between them sharper than any blade, stronger than any armor. Lorraine rose, shoulders squared, her hand still in his. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The Sovereignty fleet was hours from orbit, 6 warships looming on the far edge of the solar system, their drives flaring like hungry comets. Liren tracked their approach from Mason's cabin, the crude terrestrial console relaying cold data, formation, armaments, time to intercept. The ships flew the old banners, their signatures unmistakable. At their head sailed the flagship Resolute, and the name stamped a chill through her. Commander Tarek Voss, her former lieutenant, ruthless, unwavering, loyal to the order she had helped create and now threatened by her mere survival. His orders would be clear: eradicate all evidence of her, no matter the cost. Mason's demeanor changed as the news broke. Gentle caretaker shifting into the soldier she'd glimpsed in flashes, but never fully seen. He moved through the cabin with purpose, assembling weapons, checking gear, mapping escape routes. His voice was low and steady. Then we fight. Lorraine recoiled from the implication, the word itself a trigger: fight, destroy, annihilate. She pressed her back to the wall, fists clenched at her sides. I can't be that destroyer again. I can't let myself. Mason crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hands settling firmly on her shoulders. I'm not asking you to destroy, he said. I'm asking you to protect this world. You know their tactics, their codes. Without you, Earth is a target, nothing more. She struggled to master her fear, the old nightmares clawing at her resolve. What if protecting this world means I become the monster again? What if all I know is violence? Mason's gaze did not waver. You're not alone. You were made a weapon, but you chose mercy. You saved me, Liraean. We'll face them together. The only choice is action or annihilation. The conviction in his voice steadied her. She drew a deep breath, searching his face for doubt and finding only determination. If we survive this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I want to see the stars you spoke of, the ones worth discovering. A slow smile creased Mason's face, warming the cold in her chest. I'll show you, he promised, his hand finding hers, their fingers entwining in a perfect fit. They moved swiftly, urgency pressing in from every direction. Liraean set to work, fingers flying over the makeshift terminal she'd cannibalized from Mason's equipment and her own shattered medallion. She engineered a quantum link, delicate, invisible, bridging Earth's planetary defense grid with the Sovereignty Fleet's command protocols. But she hit a wall, the final access locked behind encrypted doors only reachable from the flagship itself. We need to board Voss's ship, she explained, grim. If I can reach the bridge, I can transmit a feedback loop, turn their weapons on themselves. But I have to do it from there. Mason's jaw tightened. Then I'm going with you. No. Lorraine's tone was fierce, almost desperate. It's a death sentence. Voss will be waiting for me. I won't risk your life. He stood his ground, eyes burning. I didn't come this far to watch you walk alone into hell. I won't let you go without me. She faltered, fear warring with relief. She saw his resolve, felt the strength in his grip. He was stubborn, human to the core, and something inside her, something long dormant, bloomed. Their kiss before the mission was fierce, desperate, tangled with hope and fear. She clung to him, memorizing the warmth of his mouth, the press of his hands, the taste of regret and possibility mingled on her tongue. Together, Mason whispered against her lips. Always. Night cloaked the land as they slipped from the cabin, moving through shadow and silence to the clearing where Mason's old dropship lay hidden beneath a camouflage net. The hull was battered, stealth plating scorched but functional. Mason powered up the systems, fingers dancing over familiar controls, the glow of the console painting his face in blue and gold. Liraean slid into the co-pilot's seat, her own hands trembling only slightly as she interfaced her neural implant with the ship's systems. The engines hummed to life, vibrations thrumming through the deck as they lifted from the ground, treetops falling away beneath them. For a moment, Earth seemed impossibly small, a fragile world poised between hope and annihilation. She glanced at Mason, catching the reflection of starfields in his eyes. What comes after? She asked, voice soft but certain. He reached for her hand, squeezing gently. Whatever you want. We get through this. We make our own future. A silence settled, heavy but sweet. Liren drew in a breath, letting herself believe. "I want to be worthy of your trust," she said, the admission raw. He turned, his gaze unwavering. "You already are." The dropship sliced through the upper atmosphere, its stealth field swallowing their signature. Ahead, the Sovereignty fleet hung against the black, warships arrayed in a crescent of cold light. On the comm, static flared, then sharpened. Voss's voice, crisp and cold as ever, demanded clearance. "Unidentified vessel. Transmit authorization code or be destroyed." Lorraine closed her eyes, searching for the old role, the persona she'd shed but never truly lost. When she spoke, her voice was a blade, icy, commanding, sovereign. "This is Lorraine Sirave, requesting emergency docking. Prepare for high-priority medical evacuation." A charged pause. Then Voss again, suspicion threading his words. "High Regent, we believed you dead." "Rumors of my demise have been exaggerated," she replied, every syllable precise. "You will open your hangar. I require immediate access." Another hesitation, then ambition, curiosity, perhaps the tiniest sliver of old loyalty. "Docking granted. Any deception, any deviation, and you will be obliterated." Mason exhaled, tension rippling through his frame. He guided the dropship into the flagship's bay, hands steady on the controls. As the magnetic clamps engaged and the ramp hissed open, he reached for her hand one last time. "Ready?" he asked, voice low, eyes burning with all the hope and fear she felt echoing in her own chest. Lorraine squeezed his hand, her resolve crystallizing. "With you, yes." Side by side, they strode into the lion's den, united by a promise forged in fire and mercy, ready to change the fate of two worlds. The docking bay was a study in tension, sovereignty soldiers lining the perimeter in immaculate formation, their faces impassive beneath mirrored visors. The acrid tang of ozone and fuel clung to the air. As the dropship's ramp hissed down, Lorraine strode into the hangar with Mason at her side, every movement regal and assured. The soldiers saluted, hesitant, uncertain, but compelled by habit and fear. She met their eyes, searching for doubt, loyalty, rebellion. They gave her only discipline in return. Commander Tarek Voss stood at the head of the welcoming party, posture rigid, every line of his body radiating cold courtesy. His uniform was spotless, his medals gleaming, but his eyes, sharp, predatory, missed nothing. "High Regent," he said, voice taut as wire. "We feared you lost." His gaze flicked to Mason, taking in the battered uniform, the set jaw, the role of silent, defeated prisoner. "And your guest?" Lorraine lifted her chin, her tone clipped. "A survivor of the surface. He has tactical data that may prove useful." Her eyes dared Voss to challenge her, and he only nodded, teeth clenched in a thin smile. "Of course." "This way." Voss gestured, and the soldiers parted as he led them through the labyrinthine corridors of the flagship. The walk was silent but charged, every footstep echoing with unspoken threat. Lorraine felt Mason tense beside her, every muscle coiled, but he kept his eyes downcast, playing the role to perfection. Voss's true plan was obvious. His route wound not toward the bridge or war room, but deeper, toward the officers' quarters. He was plotting, scheming to separate them, to spring whatever trap he had prepared. Liren matched his pace, her face carved from sovereign marble, giving nothing away. They entered Voss's chambers, a space as cold and immaculate as the man himself. Relics from conquered worlds filled the shelves. A glass sphere from the crystalline forests of Belis, a jade idol from the river kingdoms of Tyron, a battered child's toy from Lycia. Each piece was a trophy, a memory of victory, a monument to a legacy of conquest. Lorraine's gaze lingered on the Lysian toy, a faint crack in her composure, but she forced herself to remain unyielding. Voss poured himself a drink, swirling the liquid thoughtfully. You've been gone a long time, Regent. The council debated your fate. He watched her over the rim of his glass. They sent me to ensure the sovereignty's interests are maintained. I must admit, I'm surprised to see you alive, and with a human no less. Lorraine seated herself at the tactical console, crossing her legs with calculated indifference. Survival often requires unconventional alliances, Commander. Voss prowled closer, eyes gleaming. Does it now? I wonder, High Regent. Are you still the woman who conquered Eris Prime? Or have your years in exile softened you? He let the question hang, probing for weakness. Mason answered first, stepping forward with a grunt. If you want data on Earth's defenses, I have it. He kept his eyes low, voice rough with feigned defeat. The planetary grid is weak. Half the satellites are dummies. You could take the system in hours. Voss's suspicion melted into a wolfish grin. Excellent. I knew your instincts would not fail you, Regent. He relaxed, fingers dancing over the security console, eyes already hungry for conquest. But Lorraine's attention was elsewhere, her fingers a blur over the tactical panel, accessing fleet protocols, rerouting command permissions. She spoke without looking up. Tell me, Commander, what's the punishment for betrayal these days? Voss froze, realization dawning too late. He lunged for his sidearm, eyes wild, but Mason was already moving. With practiced speed, Mason closed the gap, wrenching the weapon from Voss's grasp and driving the butt of it into his gut. Voss doubled over. Mason fired. One shot, clean and final. Blood bloomed across Voss's pristine uniform as he crumpled to the floor, shock etched into every line of his face. The alarm won't work, Liren said calmly, her voice a razor's edge. She glanced at the blinking panel. I've locked down the systems. No one leaves, no one calls for help. The fleet is mine. Voss struggled to breathe, fury burning in his fading eyes. The Council will never forgive this. Lorraine leaned over him, her features bathed in the flickering light of the main screen. Let them come. I've spent lifetimes seeking war. Now I have something to protect. Her hands danced over the console, overriding every command chain, every failsafe she had once designed. On the tactical display, the sovereignty ships wheeled and pivoted, their guns turning away from Earth and toward each other. For a heartbeat, the fleet hesitated, a moment's confusion as new orders rippled through the ranks. Then chaos erupted. The flagship's main batteries fired on the nearest escort, lances of plasma carving through armored hulls. Secondary vessels responded in kind, unleashing torrents of missiles and energy. Explosions bloomed across the darkness, debris spinning in slow-motion arcs. The silence of space was shattered by the fury of a fleet destroying itself. Voss watched in horror as his legacy unraveled. You're a traitor, he gasped, blood flecking his lips. No, Lorraine replied, her voice steady. I'm finally free. Mason stepped to her side, awe and disbelief mingling in his expression as he watched the carnage unfold. Not impossible, he murmured, voice thick with emotion. Just human. The battle raged for minutes that stretched into eternity. Ship after ship tore itself apart under Lorraine's relentless commands, their crews powerless to resist. At last the screen cleared, only drifting wreckage left where the fleet had hung. Voss died on the floor, eyes fixed on the ruin outside, disbelief freezing his final breath. Liren's shoulders sagged as the tension melted from her limbs. She looked at Mason, relief and exhaustion in her violet eyes. It's over. He reached for her hand, his touch grounding her in the midst of devastation. We're free. She squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from the contact, from the knowledge that for the first time in centuries, her choices belonged to her alone. Let's make them remember us for something better. Together they turned from the carnage and faced the viewport, Earth spinning safely below, a fragile blue world, saved not by force, but by the courage to choose a different path. Two survivors, no longer destroyer and victim, but guardians, stood at the edge of a new future, the wreckage of the past drifting silently behind them. Half a year later, Liren stood on the bridge of their vessel, a ship born of two worlds, hull and circuitry, a seamless fusion of human ingenuity and sovereignty precision. The command deck curved in graceful arcs, metal gleaming with the subtle shimmer of alien alloys, the air alive with the faint pulse of both human and sovereign languages, layered together in the soft hum of systems running in perfect harmony. The forward view screen blazed with the dawn of twin suns, pale gold and deep blue, rising together over a churning violet nebula. Lorraine watched in silence, letting the sight wash over her, the slow drift of cosmic dust, the promise of open space, the certainty that this was the frontier she'd sought since childhood. Footsteps padded quietly across the deck. Mason joined her, his presence grounding as ever. He leaned on the railing beside her, gaze fixed on the stars. He broke the silence, voice gentle but searching. Regrets? She thought about it, searching the infinite for answers. About leaving the frontier behind? No. She let the words settle, honest and unguarded. About everything else? Sometimes. Her eyes flicked to the memory of fire and ruin, the legacy she could never wholly erase. You know what I was, she said softly. He nodded, reaching for her hand. And I know what you are. She smiled, faint and wistful. Earth's leaders wanted to keep me caged, use me, or destroy me. Her fingers tightened on his. You offered something else. Mason's eyes shone with quiet pride. We chose our own path. Let the old world judge if it wants. We're not theirs to command anymore. Liraine let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The ship hummed around them, alive with possibility. The sovereignty will come again, she warned, watching the nebula swirl. They won't forget what we did. They'll send more ships. More fleets. Mason shrugged, his tone easy. And when they do, Earth will be ready. You've given them a chance to fight on equal terms. New ships, new strategies, hope. He grinned, the old stubborn fire in his eyes. Besides, I'm not worried. I have the galaxy's best tactician on my side. She snorted softly, amused by his irrepressible optimism. And you, Mason Hale, are the only man I know who can survive being at my side in battle and still have the nerve to tease me. He pressed a datapad into her hands. First hybrid fighters are operational, he said, pride in every syllable. Human ingenuity, sovereignty power. Earth's defenders are already testing them near the Martian perimeter. She scrolled through the schematics, marveling at the elegant curves and lethal lines. They're beautiful, she admitted. So much potential, never for conquest, only for protection. He watched her, expression softening. That's your legacy now, Lorraine. You didn't just teach Earth tactics. You taught them how to forgive, how to trust. She looked up at him, emotions swelling in her chest. I'm not sure I'll ever forgive myself. Mason brushed a loose strand of silver hair from her face. Maybe forgiveness isn't forgetting. Maybe it's choosing to build something better every day. A chime sounded, a crisp, urgent note breaking the calm. The comm screen flickered to life, displaying a coded distress call. Lorraine tapped the controls, bringing up the transmission, Perseus sector. A human colony under siege, coordinates flashing in red. The message was short, desperate. Pirates, perhaps, or remnants of the old sovereignty, seeking vengeance. She straightened, all business now. How long to get there? Mason checked the navigation charts. 3 days at full burn. The new engines can handle it. She studied the flickering stars, the endless sprawl of darkness and possibility beyond the glass. The old longing surged up, exploration, discovery, the thrill of facing the unknown. But now, it was mingled with purpose. "We go where we're needed," she said, resolve threading through every word. Mason reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, grounding her in the present. "Always, wherever the call comes from." She turned to him, searching his face for doubt and finding none. For all the worlds they had lost, here was the one thing she had found and chosen for herself. "Do you know what you've become to me?" Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. He smiled, a slow, certain, unwavering smile. "Everything you wanted to be." The words landed between them, not as comfort, but as truth. Lirian felt it in her bones, in the ache of her old wounds, in the quiet joy that hummed through her every time Mason looked at her like that. She had been a conqueror, a destroyer, a name that sent worlds running. Now, she was something else, something harder, something worth the pain. As Mason guided the ship through its turn, setting a new course for Perseus, the nebula shifted, flooding the bridge with the light of two suns. Lirian stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, watching the future unfold with every heartbeat. Redemption, she realized, was not erasing the past. It was forging a new path from its ashes, turning scars into signposts, sorrow into wisdom. She was no longer a prisoner of memory. She was home, beside Mason, guardian of worlds, seeker of wonders, cherished and loving in return. Earth spun safely behind them, a blue promise nestled in the dark. Ahead lay trouble and hope, and every adventure the stars could hold. Lirian's heart soared with the ship, at last, truly free. Our story ends here. Make sure you subscribe, press the like button, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most in this video. Your feedback means a lot to our team. You'll discover many more captivating stories on our channel. See you in the next one.